So in this session, we're going to continue with our work on fractions. We're going to try and answer the question of how do I find non-unit fractions of an amount? And let's begin by remembering our strategy from our previous session. Now, in order to find our non-unit fractions of an amount, we can represent the total, the whole amount, as a bar. And the next thing that we want to do is to label the value of that bar. So you can see the bar in front of us is worth 45. The next stage is to take the whole amount for 45 in this instance and divide it into equal parts, and we'll know how many equal parts that we need to divide it by looking at the problem we're solving or the denominator from the fraction. So that bottom number will be the one we'll be looking at to tell us how many equal parts we need to divide this whole amount into. So now we've taken the whole amount of 45, we divided it into ninths, so our bar's being separated into 9 parts. The next stage is to share that 45, that total amount, equally into the parts, and we can use any methods we'd like in this. You could be using some concrete resources, sharing out those counters. You could be using a pictorial model, or even using your known division and multiplication facts to solve it mentally. And then this allows me to identify the amount of parts, or the fraction I'm actually talking about. So at the moment you can see that I've got one of those 9 sections, 1/9 that has been highlighted in yellow, and that gives me 5, so 1/9 of 45 is 5. And here you can see that I'm looking at 3 of those 9 parts, so 3/9, and each 1/9 is worth 5, so 3/9 is worth 3 lots of 5, so 15 in this instance. And by following these steps I can find either a unit fraction or a non-unit fraction of any amount that I want to think about. So now let's move on to today's lesson, where we're going to try and answer that question: how do I find non-unit fractions of an amount? And if we open our textbook, we can see our first problem relates to our kennel. You can see that we've got our cats and we've got our dogs and we've got the different amounts of food that are obviously going to be fed. For question 1a, we're asked, the whole bag of cat food is shared equally amongst all the cats. So how much food will 2 of the cats get in total? And in order to answer this question, we've got to firstly think about what is the whole amount that I'm dealing with here. Is it the cats or is it the cat food? And then what am I sharing it amongst? For question 1b, we're asked if there are 8 dogs in the animal home. We can see 2/5 of the total number of animals. So how many animals are there altogether? So think very carefully about this. We're told there's 8 dogs in the animal home altogether, and we can see 2/5 of the total number of animals, meaning both cats and dogs. So how many animals must there be in total? So now you can pause the video and you can attempt those 2 first questions that we're looking at. Remember, we're stepping up a little bit from our last session, so these problems are slightly more detailed, slightly more complicated, which means you need to give yourself slightly more thinking time. So for question 1a, you're being asked, the whole bag of cat food is shared equally between all the cats. How much food will 2 of the cats get in total? And for question 1b, there are 8 dogs in the animal home. We can see 2/5 of the total number of all the animals in front of us. So how many animals are there altogether? So give those a try, pause the video and come and join me when you're ready to look at the strategies we've used. So let's take a look at question 1a. The whole bag of cat food is shared equally between all of the cats. So how much food will 2 of the cats get in total? Well, the first thing we know over here is it's the whole bag of cat food that's going to be shared. And we know that the whole bag of cat food is 500 grams. So my bar represents all the cat food we have, and we're going to label that as 500 grams. Now the next part we're told is it's shared equally amongst all the cats. And by looking at the picture, we can see that we're sharing this cat food amongst 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cats. So my bar represents the whole amount of cat food, 500 grams, is now divided into 5 equal parts, with each of those 5 parts representing 1/5 of the total amount of cats, or in this instance, 1 cat. The next stage is going to be to divide that 500 equally amongst the 5 groups. And if I share out 500s into 5 equal groups, each one will get 100. And again, I can use any method I want with this. I could be using pictorial models, concrete models, doing it mentally as I choose. But The idea is I want to place the value in each one of those fifths so that I'm able to look at it and go, let's try the inverse. 100 multiplied by 5 gives me 500, because then I can double check my answer. Now we're being asked how much food will 2 of the cats have in total. Well, we know that each one of these sections, each one of the fifths, represents 1 cat. So now I've highlighted 2 of those fifths, 2 fifths, where you can see each fifth has 100 grams. So 2 fifths of 500 grams must be 100 grams plus 100 grams equals 200 grams. So how much food will 2 of the cats get in total? Well, our answer is going to be 200 grams. Now let's move on to question 1b. There are 8 dogs in the animal home. This is 2 fifths of the total number of animals. So how many animals are there altogether? So let's read that question once more just so we can make it really clear in our heads. There are 8 dogs in the animal home. This is 2 fifths of the total number of animals. So how many animals are there altogether? Now for this question, we know there's a total amount, we know there's the whole amount of animals. The problem we've got now is we don't actually know how many there are. So the first thing we're going to think about is, did the problem tell me anything about the denominator? And what can I do with that? And if we look, we can see that we're given a fraction of the total number of animals, which is 2 fifths, so our denominator is 5. So I've divided my part into 5 equal parts, with each part representing 1 fifth. Now when we look at that problem once again, we're told that those 8 dogs in the animal home are 2 fifths of the total number of animals. So, and you can see on my bar model that I've highlighted 2 of my fifths, so 2 sections, and I've labelled those 8. And then the next stage will be to look at what 1 fifth, what is the unit fraction worth. And if 2 fifths are worth 8, then 1 fifth must be half of that to be 4. So now I know that 1 fifth, the unit fraction, is 4. I've labelled my bar model with each section, each fifth, having 4 written in. Just make it really, really clear in my mind. And now we can see that I've got in orange my 2 fifths, the animals that I'm being told about. There are 8 dogs in the animal home, that's 2 fifths. That gives me 4 and 4, which is 8. And then the blue is the remaining 3 fifths, the rest of the animals. And each one of those fifths, again, is 4. So to work out 5 fifths, if 1 fifth is 4, 5 fifths is 1 fifth times 5, or in this case 4 times 5, which will give me an answer of 20. So there's 20 animals altogether in the shelter. So let's have a little recap on the strategies we've just been looking at before you move on to complete the working with your textbook and then move on to the independent activities in your workbook. We always start with using a bar model to represent the fraction that we're looking at. So in this case you can see we don't know how much the whole amount is, but we do know that we're separating that whole amount into fifths. So I've represented that using my bar model. We can then highlight the fraction we know. We're using that information that's in the problem. In this case we know that 2 fifths equals 8. So I've highlighted that to be able to identify everything. So I've recorded that value on my bar model to make really clear what I do know and what I need to work out. I've then used that information that I know to be able to identify the value of the unit fraction. So I know what the non-unit fraction is, and I've been able to divide that amount by the numerator to give me the unit fraction 1 lot. So in this case I've taken the 8, knowing that that's 2 fifths, and I've divided the 8 by 2, the numerator, to give me 4. So 1 fifth is 4. And knowing that 1 fifth is 4, I've simply completed the bar model to show the value of each fifth, so each 1 fifth being worth the same amount. Now I've been able to find the value of the unit fraction and I've labelled my bar model. Now it's quite simple to highlight the non-unit fraction I'm looking for. So in this case we can see that in orange I've got 2 fifths, which give me 4 plus 4 and 8. And in blue I have 3 fifths, which gives me 4 plus 4 plus 4, which gives me an answer of 12. And now I can find out the answer to the question, how much is the whole value? And that gives me 20, where I add up each fifth or each value of 4. And now it's time for you to move on to the rest of the questions in your textbook, remembering to come back to this slide should you have any problems, should you need any help with it, and then move on to the independent activity in your workbook. I look forward to seeing your work for this lesson. Good luck.